Good evening, everyone. Could I please request everyone to settle down? We'll be starting soon. Good evening. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues from government, diplomatic community, UN family, academia, media, a very warm welcome to this Sir John Monash lecture being delivered by Professor Tshildzi Marwala, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and the Rector of the United Nations University. My name is Rajat Khosla. I'm the Director of the United Nations University Institute on Global Health, based here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And it gives me great pleasure to convene this lecture along with Monash University in Malaysia, the UN country team, on the topic of artificial intelligence, technology, and health, the promises and challenges. A sincere thanks to our hosts, Monash University, Professor Matthew Nicholson and Professor Anthony Guo, and to the resident coordinator of the United Nations country team in Malaysia, Ms. Karima Al-Khoury. Before we request Professor Marwala to deliver the lecture, we have some welcome remarks from the co-organizers. Without much further ado, I would like to invite Professor Matthew Nicholson, Senior Vice President, Research and Operations for Monash University in Malaysia, to come on the stage and welcome the guests. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you all for being here at our campus. We're very pleased to have you all here and pleased to see you this evening. It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Marwala, a Rector of the United Nations University and Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, to Ms. Karima Al-Khoury, Resident Coordinator in Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei, Dr. Rajat Khosla, Director of the United Nations University International Institute for Global Health, and Dr. Flavia Bustreo, Chair of the United Nations University's International Institute for Global Health, the International Advisory Board of that esteemed institution. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, Your Excellencies, and other esteemed guests. The Sir John Monash Lectures at Monash University, Malaysia, have now been in operation for a decade. They are our most prestigious fora for public debate and thought leadership. With these lectures, we aim to influence and engage the Malaysian and Southeast Asian communities in a discussion of issues of considerable and significant importance in the region. The public lecture series has covered over the last 10 years a wide variety of topics, contemporary and multidisciplinary topics that have included sustainability, socio-economic development, innovation and technology, health and well-being, climate change, and geopolitical security. The Sir John Monash Lectures are presented by high-profile thinkers, international leaders, policymakers, corporate leaders, and world-class academics and experts, all of them distinguished experts in their fields and whose work has made a significant impact on the global community. Now, this evening, we're very pleased to partner with the United Nations Malaysia and the United Nations University International Institute for Global Health in bringing you this outstanding thought leader, Professor Marwala, Rector of the United Nations University. Now, Professor Marwala is an accomplished scholar and thought leader with multidisciplinary research interests that include the theory and application of artificial intelligence to engineering, computer science, finance, social science, and medicine. You can clearly see that we are in for, I think, what is a treat this evening with his talk. He has an extensive track record in human capacity development and committed to leveraging technology and global connectedness towards the pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. Monash University's strategic Plan Impact 2030 calls out 3 significant intractable global challenges that face our planet and face the people of our planet: climate change, geopolitical security, and thriving communities. And I see a great synergy in Professor Marwala's career, the topic tonight, and the strategic intent of Monash University to make a significant contribution to solving the world's global challenges. Prior to taking up his current position, Professor Marwala was the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Johannesburg and has been a visiting scholar at Harvard University, the University of California at Berkeley, Wolfson College of the University of Cambridge, and Nanjing Technical University. I won't labour the point here because I know that Professor Marwala's talk will dive into this area of AI and healthcare particularly with some significance and depth. But let me say that as AI continues to evolve, I think its role in healthcare particularly, and I mentioned the fact that Monash University has called out thriving communities and our role in both creating and maintaining and developing thriving communities as one of our core efforts over the next decade. AI's role in healthcare is poised to grow. It's poised to improve patient outcomes, streamline medical workflows, and I think if we can bridge that divide between the kind of rampant AI and the technological developments as well as the ethical controls, has great potential in shaping a more patient-centred approach to medicine. Now, what I've been asked to do here tonight by my colleagues in the School of IT is mention that Monash University, Malaysia, has recently launched its Master of Artificial Intelligence course. No public lecture like this will go ahead without a small pitch. Yep. And our Master of Artificial Intelligence, we believe, stands at the forefront of academic programs designed to equip students not only with the understanding of this rapidly advancing field, but hopefully the ability to engage and prosecute it ethically and responsibly. We had a first intake of 60 students this last semester, which I think not only reflects a very strong market demand for AI education worldwide, but I think the esteem in which this institution is held. In conclusion, let me reiterate what an honour it is to have Professor Marwala give the Sir John Monash Lecture. I'd also like to say it's a great honour to have this first lecture, Sir John Monash Lecture, that we've had since COVID. We had to suspend the lecture series for obvious reasons, and Professor Marwala's talk comes in our 25th anniversary. We were the first foreign university established in Malaysia in 1998, and 25 years later we've graduated more than 26,000 alumni, more than 800 PhD students, and currently have a cohort of almost 10,000 students and almost 600 PhD students. So at the year of our 25th anniversary, may I officially welcome Professor Marwala to Monash University and welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Nicholson, for your warm welcome and introduction to the lecture and to the work that you have been doing at the university as well. I would now like to invite the UN Resident Coordinator, Ms. Karima Al-Khoury, and co-organizer for this lecture to welcome the guest and provide her opening remarks. Karima.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, from government, the diplomatic community, from academia, media, and from the UN family. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to stand before you today as we gather at Monash University, Malaysia, a beacon of academic excellence, to attend a Sir John Monash lecture organized jointly with Monash University and the United Nations University International Institute on Global Health. On behalf of the United Nations in Malaysia, I thank our host and partner. I thank Dr. Adiba Kamaruzzaman, President and Pro-Vice Chancellor of Monash University, who is not able to be with us today, but she is represented today by Professor Matthew Nicholson. And thank you very much, Professor Nicholson, for your warm welcome. It is a great pleasure to welcome UN Under-Secretary General, Professor Marwala, our special guest and distinguished speaker today, but also our special guest over the past few days. And I'm very pleased and happy as the UN Resident Coordinator to welcome an Under-Secretary General visiting Malaysia for the first time. I also welcome other members of the UNU International Advisory Board who have traveled from very far, from all continents, and whose collective expertise continues to guide and enrich the mission of the United Nations University. I'm extremely pleased to welcome our distinguished speaker, who will enlighten us on a topic of utmost importance. Professor Marwala, thank you for accepting to deliver this lecture on artificial intelligence, technology, and health. Professor Marwala, as we've heard, is the rector of the United Nations University in Tokyo, and also a world-renowned scientist and academic known for his work in the fields of artificial intelligence and robotics. Before joining the UN, Professor Marwala was the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. Ladies and gentlemen, health and artificial intelligence stand at the forefront of technological innovation and societal progress. AI and related technologies are increasingly being integrated into healthcare, pioneering groundbreaking advancements that have the potential to revolutionize the way we diagnose, we treat, and prevent diseases. And while AI carries immense transformative potential, it also carries risks. So we very much look forward to your insights, Professor Marwala, on the promises as well as the challenges associated with utilizing and deploying these technologies responsibly and equitably, how to ensure that AI benefits the most underserved communities and areas, and contribute to reducing disparities in healthcare outcomes. So without further ado, allow me to extend our warmest welcome to USG Professor Marwala, Rector of UNU, and prepare ourselves for an enlightening discourse that promises to broaden our horizons and inspire us to inquire and innovate and work together towards a healthier and more technologically advanced, sustainable future where no one is left behind. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karima, for those remarks and for your leadership for the Sustainable Development Agenda here in Malaysia. With this, now I would like to invite Dr. Flavia Bustreo, the chair of the United Nations University International Institute on Global Health, to deliver her opening remarks and welcome the guest. Flavia.
Dear Rajat, distinguished professor from the Monash University, distinguished Professor Marwala, and most importantly, I want to speak to the young people here in the audience, the young students that are part of our International Global Institute cohort of PhD, and also the ones that you have just enrolled in the master course. I don't see 60 of them, but I hope this is recorded so they can see it online. That's a great thing about technology. You have understood, distinguished colleagues, also from the diplomatic community and from different universities, we are here as appetizer for the main course. And the main course is just coming after me, so bear with me for 2 more minutes. What I like to say is that I'm very privileged and very excited that Malaysia is hosting the International Institute for Global Health. It's an institute that is small in scale, but has tremendous potential for reaching great heights. And one of the things that we are discuss for the strategy, where we want to go, is precisely on the topic and the intersection of digital health, artificial intelligence, and the right to health. So this main course that you will be listening today is also something that we, as staff of the team and members of the advisory board, are really looking very much forward to, so that we can continue in our discussion, in our deepening, in our publishing. I also like this audience to appreciate and understand that not only me, that I'm extremely delighted to be here, but also my other members of the International Advisory Board, and they are equally distinguished, Professor Marwala, I would say, and they also happen to be all women. So that's one thing I always have to say, always, once a feminist, always a feminist. We have the leader of the Feminist Economics Association, Professor Laila Kabir, that is in our board. We have the leader, 2 times Minister of Health of Senegal, currently Minister of State in Senegal, 2 leadership of the rollback malaria and the tropical disease work, Professor Awa Kosek, and my dear friend, Professor Mariangela Simao, great colleague from within the United Nations, Assistant Director General for one of the most difficult areas in global health, which is the trade and the relationship between pharmaceutical companies. And I know you are nodding because you have seen what COVID has meant for global health. So we are excited to be listening to you, to your lecture. And as a medical doctor and a professional in public health for a long time myself, we are very aware of the potential and the impact that technologies such as artificial intelligence have on the healthcare in the world. And we are especially aware of the impact that it has, for example, on improvement of surgeries, on improvement of data collection, on improvement on the reach and extensions to remote areas. Equally, we are concerned for what technology can do to increase the inequalities. We had a lot of discussion yesterday about inequalities, but this institute, the Institute of International Global Health, is focusing on inequalities in global health. And technology, historically, has done that, has widened the inequalities. So, for example, in great parts of the world, like Australia, like my own country, Italy, people will have access and opportunity to have surgical operation, microsurgery guided by artificial intelligence for very, very complicated setting. But in many other parts of the world, this will not be possible. So what we want to hear from you is, on one end, how we look and harness this great potential, but also how do we look at minimizing those potential for increasing inequalities. And so my last teaser as appetizer for the main course, you have heard a lot of things about Professor Marwala. I will not repeat them, but in my interaction with him, I want to say he's an amazing human being and he's a great storyteller. So with those introductions, the floor is yours, please.
Good evening, and thank you very much for that introduction. Firstly, I would like to thank Rajat for organizing this and inviting me to come to the Institute. The Institute of Global Health is one of our 13 institutes of the United Nations University, and I am tempted to say this is my favorite institute. Professor Matthews Nicholson, thank you very much for hosting me in this very impressive university. Of course, I always thought Monash was in Australia. I think now I have a different view. Monash is in Malaysia. And our resident coordinator, Karima, I thank you very much for lowering the flag for me to come here and taking time to show me this very beautiful country. It's my first time coming to Malaysia. But when I was throughout my schooling, I probably have been in class with more than 100 Malaysians. So I almost feel like I have been here before. And the excellencies that are here, I saw the ambassador of Kenya. I saw the representatives from the South African embassy, including somebody from my village. Can you believe it? I did not know him in my village. I think it's because I'm slightly older than him, but I got to meet him. And also the board members of IIG. Today I am going to be talking about artificial intelligence, an area that I have been working on for a long time. When I arrived at Cambridge University to do a PhD, I actually did not know what I was going to do it on. And I sat next to Nando de Freitas, who now works for Google DeepMind. I said, Nando, what are you doing your PhD on? And he said artificial intelligence, and it just sounded like something cool. So I went and registered and completed a PhD in artificial intelligence in year 2000. And of course, artificial intelligence has been in the news quite recently. But this is not new technology. The first paper on artificial intelligence was written by Alan Turing, a British computer scientist, in 1950. The term artificial intelligence was coined by John McCarthy at Dartmouth College in the United States in 1955. All the algorithms, whether we are talking about the perceptron that is so central in deep learning and large language models, were already perfected in the 80s. So what has changed? I think two things have changed. I think the first thing that has changed is that we have far more data today than ever before. And secondly, we have far more computational power today than ever before. But we always knew that this moment shall come. We always knew because one of the founders of Intel, Moore, stated in 1965, and we call that Moore's Law, that the computational power shall double every 2.5 years. And when I entered a PhD program, 1997, and some of the students were not even here in the world. That was just after the introduction of the Pentium. When I was doing a master's degree, I could not open more than 2 programs on a computer. And I'm sure, Professor Nicholson, you know this very, very well. And of course, if you wanted to open Microsoft Word, no, we called it Word Perfect, and it was less than perfect. Or you wanted to open Excel, no, we called it Lotus 1, 2, 3, you know. I don't know why they left off 4, you know. You couldn't do, you had to close one and open another. So the computational power that has been unleashed actually has powered what we see today. And I will talk about ChatGPT. It uses a computational process, number generator called Monte Carlo simulation. And it has nothing to do with our chair who comes from Italy, because Monte Carlo is obviously an exciting place in Italy. It is an algorithm that was discovered or invented at Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project. And its use in artificial intelligence to model language was already perfected in the 90s. And of course, none of this could lead to large-scale applications because of computational power. And now, we live in a new era where it is no longer just about CPUs. It's also about GPUs, which are specifically designed to be able to deal with artificial intelligence. And of course, being an official of the United Nations, I am quite disturbed by the fragmentation of the global economy. I am quite disturbed about the fight over semiconductor chips. There is a fight going on. And unfortunately, those who are not going to have access to these computational chips are not going to participate in this revolution. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a headline saying the UAE and Saudi Arabia snatch GPUs. And I also read that some countries are being restricted from having access to GPUs. But all these things, and as I would explain later, have implications on essential things. Education. How do you leverage digital education if you don't have computational capabilities? How do you leverage medical applications of AI if you do not have computational capabilities? And of course, this requires, and there are dangers that are genuine, that if it is free for all, these chips can be used to simulate nuclear reactors and put all our lives, or all of us, in harm's way. The weaponization of technology, especially artificial intelligence, and even the computer chips, is something that we all have to be worried about. So I actually did a PhD on using artificial intelligence to detect faults in structures. In fact, the topic of my thesis was neural networks for fault identification. But the person who introduced me to that topic was not Professor Hunt, who actually comes from Melbourne, Professor Nicholson. It was actually my illiterate grandmother. She is the person who actually introduced me to this topic. She used to make clay pots. And I was very close to my grandmother. And I will accompany her to the river to get clay, and she will come and do the pot. If we ask an engineering student today to do such a thing, they will be asking you for computer-aided design software. And my grandmother could do all those things without the software. And then after that, she will put it in the sun so that it can dry. But she will have the wisdom that it is not strong enough to go and use it. So she will put it in a furnace. It will be so hot. And she will allow it to cool very, very slowly. And when I was an engineering student, that whole process of cooling is called annealing. There is an AI algorithm called simulated annealing that actually comes from that. And if we are to become bombastic, there is even an impressive equation called the Boltzmann equation that describes that phenomenon. But my grandmother understood the concept, but she did not know who Boltzmann was, let alone his complicated equation. And of course, this talks about the indigenous knowledge. So after the pots have been cooled, my grandmother will knock each one of them and listen to it. And she will say, my grandson, this is a good pot. This is a bad pot. And I will ask, how do you know? Then she will say, if it rings for a long time, it is a good pot. And when I was, and the dean is here, and he can verify this, when I was an undergraduate engineering student, they say if it rings for a long time, it means it's a lightly damped structure. If it rings for a short time, it's a damped structure, which perhaps means there are holes on the walls of the pot. My grandmother did not even know what damping is. She could not even describe it mathematically as some of you can be able to do. But she knew that these were important concepts and she understood them. And as time went on, she started throwing away good pots. Why was she throwing away good pots? Because as time was marching on, her hearing was deteriorating. And of course, that is why I went and did a PhD to use vibration data to listen to structures. And instead of using my grandmother's brain, we used neural networks, which is maybe the most important aspect of AI algorithms. Then, of course, today the topic is about health. And I have spent quite a great deal of time in health. I have 5 US patents where I'm a co-inventor, and 4 of them are actually in health. But I was introduced to this subject by a friend of mine, David Rubin, who said, there is nothing glorious than doing that which fixes people's health. Stop fixing machines and start fixing people. I listened with both ears, and I started working on how can we use AI to be able to deal with issues of health. Now, again, there are issues of data. There are issues of privacy. And I'm going to narrate a true story. So the first piece of work that we did was to analyze brain scan that used to be done at a place in Cape Town called Itemba Labs. I mean, this was in the late 2000s. And we get boxes of these things. And, you look at them, X-ray images. They are literally, you are seeing skulls. But there are people's names. There are people's names written on each one of them. So maybe they were collected in the 40s and the people who are responsible here are not here. Even that will be a problem because they probably it's not in accordance to humanity. And we took back those bags and say, please remove the names because we are not interested in the names. We are interested in the images so that we can use it to train an AI system and help people fix the condition that we are working on. And these are some of the very complicated ethical issues that we had to deal with. And of course, AI can be divided into various types. You have AI that requires huge amounts of data. That is what you call machine learning. Machine learning is an AI system that primarily uses statistics and data to create machines that are intelligent to be able to make decisions. And this is very key, data. And I will come to this issue of data. Then you have data poor AI, fuzzy logic. It's quite a good, it's an example. There used to be fuzzy logic washing machines that were designed by Samsung. This is an AI algorithm that assumes that because you do not have enough data, you cannot be able to form probability distribution functions. You can only at best form possibilistic models. And of course, when I was at Imperial College, one of our professors, Ibrahim Mamdani, originally from Tanzania, is one of the founders. In fact, there is a Mamdani fuzzy logic algorithm, you know. So you have spectrum of artificial intelligence. On the one hand, the one that uses data and statistics. On the other hand, the one that does not use data. And there's a trade-off. The one that is statistical is not transparent. We cannot be able to explain why it has made the decisions that it has made, with implications. Because if it is making decisions on health outcomes, and something goes wrong, and the family comes and say, why did you choose that course of action? The doctor shall not be able to explain. But it is more accurate. Then you have this one on the other hand, which is data poor. But it is, you can explain what it is doing. So this interplay between transparency and accuracy is one of the issues that we need to untangle in our time. Now, I came back to South Africa in 2003, 2001. So I wanted to buy a house. So I went to a bank. Because I'm not in South Africa, I am going to mention the name of a bank. It's called Standard Bank. And then they look at me, they look at my salary slip, they say, you actually qualify for us to give you money to buy a house. But you need to take a life insurance. Why? So that if you die before you finish paying off, that is the mechanism of capitalism, you know. If you die before you finish paying off the mortgage, the insurance will cover you. Okay, they give me the forms. Then they say, you have to go and take an HIV test. In South Africa in 2000, when you wanted an insurance, you had to physically go and take an HIV test. I went and took an HIV test, which came negative. And you know, it's not something, you know, in some instances people will be positive and they will be denied the life insurance. And we needed to stop that. We had to stop that because it was violating the human rights of those people who wanted those loans. So this really actually disturbed me quite a great deal. So we said we are going to do an AI system, and I have written a book on this, 2 books on this, that is going to take a piece of data and be able to calculate the risk without telling people to go and take HIV test. The question was, where do we get the data? And what is the nature of the data? Then we were told that no, in South Africa there's something called antenatal data. So when a pregnant woman presents herself to an antenatal clinic, they almost measure everything. You know, what is your educational level? What is your income? Gravidity, parity. The doctors know what I'm talking about, you know. Who is your partner? How old are they? And so on and so forth. And then they will measure HIV, mandatory HIV test, and they will record it, and mandatory syphilis test, and they will record it. So we have these huge amounts of data, which we are going to use artificial intelligence to build a system where you input demographic data, and what comes out is the risk of HIV. It worked perfectly. But not quite. There were quite some issues. The first issue that we had to deal with was the problem of missing data. The problem of missing data because certain variables get missing. You know, income is one of them. You know, people don't really show their income. Sometimes, especially South Africa does have a problem of teenage pregnancy. And sometimes the partners are not young. There might even be a 50-year gap between the two. They don't put the age of a partner. And of course, the implication of that is that the AI system that you create is actually impaired because it does not have all the information. And the problem of AI with missing information is a problem that has been ignored in the global north simply because the global north is actually data rich. And we have written a book on this one. So we developed algorithms to deal with missing data. We found out that Donald Rubin at Harvard had spent a lot of time. He even has an algorithm. And for those of you who studied AI, you will know it. It's called EM algorithm. It basically can be able to enable you to create an AI system where you can be able to use it even if you have missing information. You know. And then the thing worked like magic. And then we went to an insurance company. We said, we have a solution for you. Then they said, yeah, it works very well. But how about if the person who presents himself is a man? Because the database you use is from the antenatal clinic. And all the subjects that have been used are women. That was the problem that we couldn't solve. And of course, the best we could say was that, maybe you should ask a man about the characteristics of his wife. And there probably is a strong correlation between the two. And of course, this is what you call algorithmic bias. Basically, an algorithm that works for one section of the population and it does not work for another section of the population. We all know about an algorithmic system that was pulled off. It was taking a CV and doing some form of classifying who qualifies for the job and so on and so forth, and they found out the algorithm was discriminating against women, you know, and these are the issues. So that was one work that we did in medical work. And then the other one was, you know, diseases. I gave you an example of image processing to deal with diseases, HIV, and finally, almost finally, on the issues of diseases, malaria. In fact, not even malaria, cancer. Microarray data to be able to deal with issues of cancers. I guess what I'm trying to say is that AI has huge capabilities. It can be able to predict. It can be able to predict, certainly if you have data, and if you have good algorithms, and if you have computational power to be able to process everything. But what are some of the dark alleys of this? I think the first thing that we need to be worried about is the issue of synthetic data. I was reading on Financial Times that by 2024, 60%, and it comes from Gartner, I don't know where they came up with that 60% of data that is used to train AI system will be using synthetic data. And we just issued policy guidelines on synthetic data. Now, what is this thing called synthetic data? It's basically data that is made by a computer. There is a website that says these people never existed. You can go to it, and you will see pictures of people, but they never existed. So this data is fake. Okay, it's not fake, or it is fake, but it's synthetic. It has uses. Medical textbooks that now have realistic pictures that look like they're pictures of people, but there is no privacy violation because those people never existed, But the same technology can be used to create fake images of individuals, fake videos of individuals, political opponents, to be able to use it as a political tool. And what is even much more interesting is that it is being used to augment digital minorities. When you are forming a face recognition algorithm and you have data of people from country X, but none of 3 people from country Y, you can augment the people from country Y with synthetic data. But of course, we can see the outcomes are not going to be symmetrical. One is going to be treated better than another. So we need ethical guidelines. The Secretary General has called for the ethical guidelines of AI to make sure that issues of privacy are respected, to make sure that issue of data scarcity are addressed, to make sure that issues of security of data are redressed. And of course, the commercialization of this technology is another thing that we need to worry about. Autonomous weapons is something that we need to worry about. Because really, there are 3 ways in which you can be able to use this technology. The first one is human in the loop, which basically means an algorithm makes a decision, but that decision is not final. A human must come and say, yes, we can go ahead. Then you can have human out of the loop, where the algorithm can make a decision independent of a human being. Then you can have a human on the loop. This is a situation similar to a co-pilot, an autopilot on an aircraft. Those pilots are just sitting there, drinking coffee, and they just wait for things to go wrong. They just wait for things to go wrong, and when things go wrong, then they can intervene. I think when it comes to issues of autonomous weapons, you cannot have a human on the loop. And you certainly cannot have a human out of the loop. There always has to be a human agency when life is at stake. The question is, how about in health? How about in health? These decision support systems that have been developed and they are proven to be effective. Some of them are as effective as over 95% of accuracy, much, much better than a human doctor. Because they have been proven to be better than a human doctor, do we remove a human out of the loop? Why? By the way, I do not have answers, and I'm hoping that many of you are actually going to give us answers to this. But these are ethical dilemmas that we actually have to deal with. Then there is the issue of the world of work. It is clear that the automation that is enabled by AI is displacing people from the world of work. Automation is old. If you went to an automotive assembly line in the 80s, there was automation. But it was not as intelligent as automation today. And therefore, it did not displace as many people from the workforce as it does today. And of course, the companies will say, well, if we do not adopt these technologies, we are actually going to be out of the job. We will have to close shop because we are not going to be competitive. Now, where lies the balance? And what happens to the future of work? What are the jobs that are actually going to emerge? I give an example of a doctor again. If, God forbid, a doctor has to come and announce a dreaded disease that has impacted an individual, is it better done by a human doctor or by a robot? Well, when I pose this question to a friend of mine who is here in the audience, I'm not going to reveal your name. He says the doctors see these things every day, they start behaving like robots themselves. So these are the issues that we obviously have to worry about. So in conclusion, and this is really the conclusion, George Orwell once said, and I quote, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Indeed, without adequate safeguards and protection of rights in the digital space, we risk the health and well-being not only of people today, but of future generations. What is to be done? I think education must become much more multidisciplinary. I think the people who are taking, I think that masters in artificial intelligence course must have compulsory humanity and social science courses if it is going to have any meaning in the world we want to build. I also think those who are in the human and social sciences, I think there has to be a minimum level of scientific literacy that they should also have. I think we need to create AI literary course. When I was the Vice Chancellor of University of Johannesburg, we introduced a course called AI literacy, where more than 50,000 students had to take. It would not make them programmers, but it will make them understand what this thing is all about. I think we need to do something about data. Data is the new, I'm not going to use the word oil because it is not renewable. Data is the new water. Yeah, whoever said data is the new oil, we need to correct that person. And we need to ensure that access to it, but it should be safe. It should protect human rights. And it should not be misused to harm people, but to produce solutions. I think the third thing that we need to do, we actually need politicians who understand science. Because we need to now make regulations about privacy, about data. I was reading about the GDPR is a law in Europe. And they have a clause, the right to be forgotten, which basically means if you go on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, you know, Elon is originally from South Africa, and you actually come out of it and you say, I don't want to have anything to do with Twitter. That European law says Twitter must forget who you are, and it must genuinely forget who you were, which means the data must really, really, really be removed. And the big question is there no such a thing such as digital footprints? And what does it mean? Does it mean that it can be enacted and be used in the future? All these regulations require a complex understanding of science and technology, but also of human and social sciences. The lack of any aspect of that actually is going to result in us having impaired laws and regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Please have a seat. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Marwala. That was stimulating and riveting. I have to say, you explained the concepts that I've tried to understand so easily in the last 45 minutes. That was remarkable. Thank you so much for taking us through that tour de force, as one would want to say. You raised some fundamental questions about the appropriate use of AI. Who decides what is the appropriate use of AI? And how do we use AI so that it does not further exacerbate inequalities? But you also highlighted some fundamental points about the future outcomes of the development of AI and the fact that they will depend upon the decisions that we take today and how we advance those decisions, the policy decisions, the ethical decisions that you talked about. But crucially, as you highlighted, as with other technologies, preventing or minimizing the threats posed by AI will require international agreements and cooperation. Professor Marwala, a discussion today has highlighted that technology is not a panacea, and we should not pretend it is one. There are non-technological solutions that we should be looking at as well to address some of the fundamental challenges that you have so articulately highlighted for us. For it to be effective, we need to ensure that the necessary systems and regulations are in place to address the harms, but also make sure that the benefit reaches those who need it the most. As we contended with the growing adoption of AI to address our healthcare needs, we need to learn from the past experiences, ensure, as you rightly said, human rights are at the center of those advancements. As we conclude this John Monash lecture today, we have a lot of thinking that you have left with us. There will be time in the reception after this lecture for questions and interactions with you and to exchange ideas. But before we conclude, I would like to invite you, Professor Nicholson, back on the stage, and you also, Professor Marwala, for the conclusion of this lecture.